Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving deep into your sources about an ingredient that's absolutely everywhere, especially, marketed in foods trying to seem healthy. But the research you've pulled together, well, it suggests this common additive might be doing some surprising and potentially serious things inside your body.
That's right. We've got articles, research papers, notes. They all paint a picture of what one source starkly labels the hashtag one most dangerous common health food ingredient in the world. It's a huge claim, obviously. So our mission today is to really get into what the sources say is behind that headline. What are the facts?
All right, let's jump straight into identifying this ingredient. Sources introduce it first with a chemical name that's, well, it's a bit of a mouthful. Substituted chlorinated disaccharide.
Or as you likely know it, sucralose.
Sucralose, okay. And the sources waste no time showing just how prevalent it is. They call it one of the fastest growing ingredients used, specifically calling out health foods, things like protein powders, supplements, drinks.
It's truly ubiquitous, yeah, according to this material. You'll find it in nearly 4,000 different food, beverage, and even healthcare products. It's particularly dominant here in the U.S. Globally, it represents, 28% of the high-potency sweetener market, which is already a massive $1.2 billion market, and it's expanding rapidly, like 10% each year.
Wow, 10% annual growth is huge for an ingredient. And the sources point out that it's recently overtaken aspartame to become the most widely used artificial sugar alternative worldwide.
That transition alone is pretty noteworthy. Now, here's the first kind of surprising contrast the sources highlight. Despite its common presence, especially in diet or healthy products, the reality, according to this research, is quite different. One source actually equates the FDA itself, admitting that sucralose doesn't really help people reach a healthy weight, and it might even increase appetite.
Which completely flips the script on its common marketing, right? And the sources mentioned the World Health Organization recently looked at this too, recommending against using certain sugar substitutes, sucralose included,
Yeah.
specifically for weight loss, because the evidence just isn't there that it works for that purpose.
Exactly. The marketing versus the documented effects, that's definitely a key theme running through these sources.
What's also wild, based on this material, is the origin story of this chemical. I mean, it wasn't intentionally created to sweeten your coffee creamer or anything.
No, not at all. The sources share this almost unbelievable tale from 1975. Apparently, it was invented by accident. A lab assistant was working on a chemical intended as an insecticide. The story goes he misunderstood instructions and tasted it, thinking it was a taste test, not, a test for insecticide properties.
Wait, he tasted a chemical being developed as a bug killer. That is unexpected.
It definitely is. And despite its origin and that initial consideration as an insecticide, once they realized how intensely sweet it was, the team sort of shifted gears. They researched it, patented its use in food back in 1976, from potential pest control to, well, pantry staple.
The journey is just bizarre, and the name change is part of that marketing pivot, isn't it? I mean, substituted chlorinated disaccharide isn't going on a bright yellow packet.
No way. The sources note the company Tate& Lyle changed the name to Sucralose purely for marketing appeal, not for scientific reasons, and then marketed as Splenda by a Johnson & Johnson subsidiary at the time. It used the tagline, made from sugar so it tastes like sugar. The sources are careful to add, though, that regulatory agencies later found this claim to be, well, deceptive advertising.
So a history of marketing claims that didn't quite align with the facts, starting right with the name itself.
Yeah.
Okay, let's break down the chemistry quickly. Without getting too deep in the weeds, those who say it's made from sugar, but how exactly is it different?
Well, the core idea, based on the sources, is that they take a regular sugar molecule and chemically alter it, specifically by adding chlorine to it. They swap out parts of the sugar molecule, these parts called hydroxy groups, with chlorine atoms. This whole thing involves a multi-step chemical process. The sources outline it as like 10 to 12 different reactions.
Okay, so it's basically a sugar molecule with chlorine bolted onto it through some kind of factory process. And that chlorine is what makes it so much sweeter.
Yes, exactly. That chemical modification makes it about 600 times sweeter than plain old table sugar, according to the sources.
600 times. Okay, that explains why you only need such a tiny amount. Now, the sources flag this chlorine addition as the root of some major concerns.
Right. The primary concern raised is that this chlorine, when it interacts with organic material, can potentially form harmful byproducts. And this is where the potential negative health effects the sources discuss really come into play.
And the research findings highlighted in the sources are pretty stark, aren't they? There's one study mentioned specifically on human intestinal tissue,
Hmm.
done at North Carolina State, I think.
Yeah, that's the one. It found that exposing this tissue to sucralose led to increased gene activation. So certain genes were turned on more. It altered DNA and created inflammation, oxidative stress, and changes linked to cancer right there in the tissue. The source you shared explicitly uses the phrase, it breaks your DNA.
That breaks your DNA phrasing is definitely powerful, and it comes straight from one of the sources.
It does, and the material also lists a whole range of potential symptoms researchers have tied to this ingredient in studies. Things like unexplained fatigue, headaches, brain fog, even issues with the reproductive system and problems with the immune system.
Hmm. A really wide array of symptoms that might seem totally unrelated to a sweetener. What about the gut specifically? You mentioned intestinal tissue.
Yes, the sources highlight a recent study suggesting sucralose might damage the gut lining, potentially leading to what people often call leaky gut. Basically, meaning the barrier in your gut might not be as effective, allowing unwanted stuff to potentially pass through. That study, noted as being from the Journal of Toxicology and Environmental Health, also found sucralose increased the activity of genes associated with inflammation and cancer.
So the chemical process itself and the resulting molecule, that seems to be the core issue raised by these studies.
Yeah.
How does this compare to, say, a sweetener derived from a plant, like stevia?
Yeah, the sources draw a really clear contrast there. They note that these kinds of issues, the DNA alteration, the gut changes, inflammation links, are not seen with plant-based alternatives like stevia or monk fruit. They describe stevia as coming from a leaf you could, grow and process simply, or monk fruit as something you could just whittle down, kind of emphasizing their natural origins compared to the complex chemical synthesis of sucralose.
Okay, so the raw material and how it's processed really matter. But the sources say there's maybe an even deeper problem related to what happens to sucralose after it gets into your body.
This is where the deep dive gets really interesting, and maybe most concerning, according to the sources. They point out that early regulatory approvals largely assumed sucralose just passed through the body without changing. You consume it, it's sweet, you excrete it, simple.
But the sources are saying that's not the whole story. That's not what actually
But
happened.
not at all. They cite research showing that certain bacteria living right there in your gut microbiome, they actually grab a hold of the sucralose and metabolize it. They turn it into a specific, different chemical substance called sucralose 6-acetate.
Sucralose 6-acetate.
Okay.
So your own gut bacteria are transforming the sucralose into this new chemical. And the sources say this byproduct is the main culprit behind the problems.
Precisely. The sources make it very clear. It's this sucralose 6-acetate, produced right there in your gut, that they link to breaking DNA, causing inflammation, oxidative stress, and those potential links to cancer. This is the mechanism the sources really emphasize as critically important.
Wow, that shifts the focus entirely, doesn't it? It's not just the molecule you swallow, but what your body makes from it. And this byproduct, sucralose 6-acetate, it's so potent that regulatory bodies are even aware of it.
Yes, the sources note that agencies like the European Food Safety Authority, they actually have limits on the maximum levels of sucralose 6-acetate that are allowed in food products themselves before you even eat them.
Which sort of acknowledges its toxicity, right?
Yeah.
Even before your gut potentially creates more. What about manufacturers who say their product doesn't contain this stuff?
Right. The sources mention claims by companies like Splenda that their product, on the shelf, doesn't contain measurable amounts of sucralose 6-acetate. But the source's counterpoint is critical. That might be true in the package, but the problem is your own gut bacteria are doing the work of converting it once you eat it.
So it's an internal metabolic process that's the real issue here. The sources also connected this byproduct to the liver somehow.
Yes, they state that sucralose 6-acetate is hard in the liver. Which brings us to another major point they make about sucralose's impact on, well, one of your body's most vital organs.
Okay, let's talk about how much might be a problem based on these sources, because people consume this stuff in very different amounts, obviously. What did the studies find about dosage?
Well, one study highlighted in the sources found that consuming just 45 milligrams per day of sucralose over a period of 10 weeks, that was enough to create DNA damage.
Just 45 milligrams a day for 10 weeks, causing DNA damage. That seems like a surprisingly low bar.
It does seem low, and the sources provide a really relatable example to illustrate this. They point out that a popular energy drink they looked at contained 100 milligrams of sucralose in a single serving.
Hold on. One energy drink has more than double the amount that caused DNA damage over 10 weeks in that study.
Exactly. The sources calculate that drinking just one of those energy drinks daily could potentially lead to DNA damage over a similar 10-week time frame. It really makes you think about how easy it could be to hit that level just by having a single common diet beverage.
Yeah, that example is really impactful.
Yeah.
Okay, now, how does the liver fit into this picture,
hmm
especially beyond the byproduct just being hard on it?
This is another key mechanism the sources unpack. Your liver is your body's primary filter, right? It processes a huge volume of blood every day using these special proteins to capture and neutralize toxins so your body can get rid of them.
Right, it's the main detox hub. So how does sucralose interact with that whole system?
Okay, here's where the sources reveal something quite striking. When sucralose arrives at the liver, these detox proteins, according to the sources, they give it preferential treatment. They essentially give it a fast pass, diverting their resources to process and eliminate the sucralose first, almost like it jumps the queue.
The liver prioritizes sucralose over other toxins. Seriously.
That's the core finding highlighted, yes. And the critical consequence, as the sources explain it, is that because the liver's resources are tied up dealing with the sucralose, it means other toxins get left behind. Things like medications, alcohol, or just everyday chemicals from your environment, they sort of sit there, effectively making the liver more toxic, as one source puts it, and hindering its ability to deal with everything else it's supposed to process. The sources describe this like the sucralose is actually tricking the liver.
So this one ingredient could not only potentially cause harm itself via that byproduct in the gut, but it also actively makes your body less able to detoxify from everything else.
That is precisely the argument the sources make for why they view it as particularly dangerous. It has this dual impact, potentially causing damage in the gut inflammation, DNA issues via its byproduct, and interfering with the liver's essential detoxification function, making it harder to process all the other toxins your body encounters daily.
And the sources put this in a broader health context too, right? About liver health in general.
They do. They point out that liver health is a growing concern globally. They cite stats like 100 million people already having fatty or toxic liver conditions, calling it the fastest growing liver condition. They even project that by 2050, maybe 55% of the world's population could have a fatty liver. Their point is, if your main detox organ is compromised or, distracted, it has ripple effects, making other organs and systems more toxic too.
That context really underscores the potential impact of anything that might hinder liver function.
Wow. Okay. So given all this research, how can someone start to figure out if they might be experiencing issues potentially related to sucralose exposure based on what the sources say? Well, the sources list a number of unexplained symptoms that they suggest could be tied to sucralose toxicity in some individuals. These include things like feeling sluggish, persistent fatigue, maybe a heavy feeling in your legs, like lead weights, mood changes too. Severe cramping, especially noted for females during their cycle, intense or sharp shooting pains, painful bowel movements, bloating, flatulence, even dizziness, confusion, unexplained tiredness, joint pains, headaches, and diarrhea. A whole list.
Right, those are symptoms that could obviously be caused by many things, which is probably why the sources call them unexplained until you look closer. So if someone recognizes some of these symptoms in themselves, what's the first practical step suggested by the sources?
The most direct action is to become a label detective. Really chain the ingredient list on everything you consume. Look for the word sucralose, or that chemical name, substituted chlorinated disaccharide.
And the sources showed examples of specific products where this is often found, right? Surprising many people because they're often marketed as healthy or diet options.
Exactly. Yeah, they called out common culprits like energy drinks, most beverages labeled light or sugar-free, many coffee creamers, instant hot chocolate mixes, lower sugar fruit juices like cranberry, specific sports drinks like Gatorade, low calorie. Surprisingly, even some packaged fruits like peaches were mentioned, lower sugar oatmeals too, and various fitness supplements, protein drinks, and powders. The sources really emphasize how often it hides in plain sight in foods people are choosing, specifically because they think they're making a healthier choice.
Okay, so check those diet and health food labels especially carefully. If someone finds sucralose in their diet and maybe suspects it might be contributing to symptoms, what steps do the sources outline for trying to, counteract the potential exposure?
Based on the sources, there's sort of a multi-step approach. First and foremost, eliminate it. Get it out of your diet entirely. They suggest trying this for about 2 weeks just to see if your body begins to respond and symptoms maybe improve. You have to cut off the source of the potential problem first.
Right. Stop consuming it. Makes sense. What's step two?
Second, support your body's natural detoxification systems. The sources emphasize increasing natural sources of glutathione and the building blocks your body needs to make it. They describe glutathione as your body's key street sweeper, basically, for clearing out toxins. The building blocks are mentioned as cysteine. NAC is a popular form people supplement with glutamic acid, and glycine.
Okay. And which foods provide those or help boost glutathione production?
The sources specifically recommend cruciferous vegetables, so broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, bok choy, Brussels sprouts. They mention these contain sulforaphane, which can help increase glutathione production.
Mm.
Avocados are noted as containing glutathione directly, and turmeric is highlighted for boosting it in liver cells, so really leaning into these whole foods.
Got it. Eat your broccoli and cauliflower.
Yeah.
And the third step.
The third step focuses specifically on supporting the liver's cleansing process. The sources note that while sucralose itself might clear out relatively quickly, its half-life is around 2 weeks, sometimes as short as 5 days maybe. The problem is that its priority treatment by the liver means other toxins got backed up.
Right, because of that fast pass effect we talked about earlier.
Exactly. So they suggest following a liver-supportive eating plan and maybe using targeted nutrients to help the liver catch up and efficiently process those accumulated toxins. They mention things like milk thistle and lemon water powder as examples to support the liver's detoxification pathways. Those are the biological processes the liver uses to, wrap up chemicals and prepare them for elimination. The sources even mention specific liver cleanse programs or challenges as potential ways to facilitate this process, basically helping the liver clear out the backlog.
Okay, so the plan is stop putting the potentially problematic ingredient in, eat foods that help your body clean house internally, and specifically support the liver in processing everything else that might have gotten delayed.
That really sums up the strategy presented in the sources, to address the potential issues they describe.
Well, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive into the source material on sucralose. We've gone from its surprising prevalence and marketing contrasts through its accidental and chemically altered origin down into the crucial mechanism of how your gut bacteria might turn it into a potentially harmful byproduct, its surprising interaction with the liver's detox system, and finally, some practical steps you can take based on this research.
It really shows how digging into the science behind common ingredients can reveal things that are, very different from how they're often marketed.
Absolutely. We've definitely uncovered a lot about this ingredient found in so many products. The key takeaway seems undeniable. Check those labels, especially on anything marketed as light, diet, or healthy.
Yeah, being informed about what's actually in your food is always the best starting point.
So, considering how widely sucralose is used and pushed as a diet aid, and everything we've just learned from these sources about its chemistry, its byproducts, its impact on detoxification, what does this deep dive really suggest about the challenges we face today when trying to navigate the complex world of packaged foods and all those health claims? Something to think about next time you're grocery shopping.